Ohio. We're out here in Maui, and today we have a very cool opportunity because we have 3 of the exact same bike across 3 KTM generations. And we're even running the same tires. So I'm following Jay now. He's on his 2021 or 22, I think, KTM 350 EXC-F. I'm on my 2018, and we got John behind me on his 2024 350 EXC-F. And like I said, we're lucky because we got even the same tires. Although mine, I will say, have the most hours on them. And my bike in general has the most hours on it. So I'm going to try to ride them back to back a little bit and let you guys know what I feel. Still on my 2018, riding through the tight single track. So I haven't really compared anything yet because I haven't ridden any of the other bikes. But something I really like about this bike is in stuff like this, it's very active. The suspension is very, very plush and almost bouncy. That makes it like a very compliant ride. You feel pretty planted, and it feels mountain goaty. Like you can change direction pretty quickly. It's very maneuverable, easy to balance on. I feel like the engine's got some really good low down torque. I'm actually riding a gear up all the time because it just is smoother. You can hear how chattery it is, and I like that. I don't like having that like really on-off power. And there's a little bit less engine braking too with the riding gear up, and there's still plenty of down low torque if you want to kind of hammer it out of a corner, only using some of the throttle. So I think that's what I really like about this bike. Power is super smooth. Suspension's pretty predictable in tight stuff like this, and it's generally pretty comfortable. It's a little tall and top heavy compared to a 2-stroke that I usually ride, but it still feels pretty light on its feet. So keep riding, letting you know my thoughts. Alright, so I'm on John's 2024. So this is the new KTM, new forks, new chassis, new engine. And I've been riding it for a minute, a single track. And his controls are kind of weird for me, but I will say immediately, this bike is way more confidence inspiring than my 2018. It feels lower, feels more planted, feels more nimble. Really everything is better. Engine is smoother, actually. It's a little bit, might be the gearing, it's a little bit less. We'll continue this video once we're all back together. Absolutely ride through here at about the same speed, but this one feels easier to do so right away. I just jumped on it and it's just very confidence inspiring. It is Huge difference. Again, the tires are the same, although John's are newer, so maybe that's part of the reason. But the engine is actually very smooth. It's got a little bit less grunt off the bottom, I feel like. Like it's maybe a little bit leaner off the bottom. Overall power is very similar. I don't know if I'd be able to tell the difference, to be honest with you. But the main things are in the chassis. The bike feels smaller. You just feel more confident on it immediately. I will kind of say this almost feels in this tight stuff like riding my 300. It's very nimble. It's actually very surprisingly nimble. Part of that, I think, is maybe the front tire. It feels like the front has a lot more traction. So I think it's because this front tire is practically new. And I'm sure that makes a huge difference. I'm trying to really send it because I don't want to break John's fancy LED headlight. It's probably really expensive. But yes, I think the answer to my question of whether there's a difference between a 2018 and a 2024, absolutely. If you have a choice between the two bikes, I think for me it would be a no-brainer. I hate to say it because I really like my 2018, but this bike is way better. It just feels, it feels much more small and kind of manageable. I think I actually like the engine on my bike a little bit better. This one doesn't. This one's a little bit less powerful. Maybe it's a little more choked up or something. But the chassis on this bike for this kind of stuff, and specifically in the 4-stroke, is really good. Actually, I think I like it more in the 4-strokes than I like in the 2-strokes, because the stiffness is not as apparent. And maybe KTM designed it with their 4-strokes, like with their supercross bikes in mind, and that's why it actually works so well in this 4-stroke. So just to cover some of the other aspects, the brakes, the ergonomics, everything like that feels pretty similar. I think, yeah, it's, brakes feel identical, clutch feels identical. Yeah, I think third gear would be a tall order for this bike in this trail. So I think the gearing is maybe a little bit too wide. We'll try it on the more open stuff too and see how it does. Sitting on it too, I feel like it feels, this is where, especially where it feels small when you sit down on it. Ugh. Oh, I love 4-strokes. Brake is actually not too low. It's pretty easy to reach. Alright, so now we're on this bigger, wider stuff. I feel like it absorbs the smaller hits really nice. You don't even really feel the small chop. pull-ups are still kind of sketchy, so the suspension is still reasonably soft. Yeah, this still kind of sucks, but it does stay pretty straight. I do feel like my bike has maybe a little bit more power. This bike feels more just choked up. To sum it up, I would for sure say there's a massive difference between my 2018 and this 2024. If you're thinking about making an upgrade, I think it would be an upgrade. The chassis is excellent in this bike for this kind of riding. You know, single track, faster type riding, but even tight single track, because the whole bike feels smaller. And again, this is specifically to the 350F. Whole bike feels smaller, more nimble, more planted, and I'd say the engine's basically the same. And all the ergonomics, brakes, all that stuff, it's basically the same. But for just the chassis feel, not even so much the suspension, I feel like it's worth it.
Gonna get one?
I don't think so, but it is a very awesome bike. If I was shopping for one, I would be very tempted. That is for sure. I just don't have a need for a 350 for another one.
Right.
Alright, so now I am on Jay's 2022, I think you said it was. But basically it's a 2020 through 2023 platform. And this feels very, very similar to mine. Just kind of like to my 2018, just a more refined version of it. And I'm gonna say I like the engine on the 2018 and the 2022 better than the 2024. I feel like it lugs down low better. And the suspension on this bike feels way better. This bike is way more sure-footed than my 2018. My 2018 is freaking Mount Goaty as hell through here. It's almost kind of scary. This feels way better. Should make Jay go first so he can read the trail. And part of that is, again, the tires that I have on my bike. Oh, I stalled her. Here am I anyway. Part of that might be the tires that I have on my bike, and part of that might be the fact that my suspension's got 110 hours on it. And I did the forks around 20 hours when I first got the bike, but I never serviced the shock. Bike is definitely a lot more refined than on my 2018. It still gets upset, but it's not as frequent. So this is almost kind of like the perfect middle ground in some ways. Or perfect, or not perfect, is up to you, but I'd say the chassis and the ergonomics and the engine all feel very similar on this bike to the 2018. So if you're thinking 2018 or 2020, that part's very much practically the same. But the suspension on this bike is better. It stays more planted, it stays more level through the choppy stuff. You feel more in control. So if you're considering a 2018 or a 2020 plus, or like a 2017 or through 2019 or 2020 plus, go for the 20, and the price is similar. I'd say it's definitely worth getting the 2020 just for the more refined chassis and primarily suspension feel. Like, it just feels like it could go way faster on this bike comfortably. But if the price difference is big and you can afford to, you know, let's say there's like a $2,000 price difference, and you can afford to use that money to get the suspension dialed, then that's really the biggest difference between the two bikes. I know the frame is different and all that, but that's much less obvious. The biggest thing is just the refinement and the feel of the forks and the shock. And just a much more planted feeling that you get from it. Despite all this, Jay is directly behind me on my bike. So clearly, the difference in actual like trail speed is not significant. It'll be interesting to see what he thinks. But yeah, it's very interesting. So while we're riding here, just to sum it up, so 2018, great bike. I'd say the biggest shortcoming in it is the suspension. It's the first generation, first iteration of the Explorer stuff, and it kind of shows. 2020 plus, much feels in all ways very similar. Engine almost identical, maybe a little bit smoother, but very almost imperceptible. Ergonomics, everything the same. Brakes, clutch, all that stuff the same. But the suspension, both front and rear, feel a lot more refined. Part of that, I'm sure, is the frame. Part of that is the fact that they kind of figured out the Explorer stuff in 2020 plus. And it is a noticeable difference. And then jumping to 2024, I'd say I actually like the engine a little bit less. It feels more kind of electric. There's less down low torque. You can't carry third gear through stuff like this, at least comfortably for me. And but it is pretty smooth from the bottom. But the chassis and the front forks are awesome, and the whole bike feels smaller. Feels like you're almost riding a two-stroke on that bike. So I think that's the high level differences: 2018, 2022, and 2024. So what do you think?
Well, the biggest difference for me actually is, besides the front tire that feels like it is fairly sketchy, is that for whatever reason it feels easier to get over the front of this bike to me.
Huh.
I feel like intellectually, I know this probably isn't true, but I somehow feel like the front end is a little lower, maybe a little shorter, so it's easier for me to be up over the bars. I don't know. Power seems similar. Huggability pretty same. What do you think?
I think this feels like a more refined. I think the front tire is absolutely garbage on that bike.
Yeah.
It is very sketchy.
It did dump me on the ground 2 miles an hour.
But this feels like a more refined version of this. Like it feels like all the like little weird stuff that bike does, this one doesn't do. Like chassis / suspension wise. And part of that might also be the fact that I need to service my suspension at some point.
This bike has factory suspension. I think it's like just under 50 hours.
Yeah.
It's slowly losing a little bit of oil off the right side, so that could be helping.
More traction. I could catch up to Jay now. He's gone pro. I feel like it's getting more slippery. I have like a flat tire or something. Can't keep up with Jay, and I'm gonna blame my bullshit front tire. Just can't go around these corners very quickly. It opens up a little bit and I don't need to turn as much. I can actually kind of reel him in. It out a little bit. Starting to get tired. That was my chance.